If you think you know what betrayal looks like, wait until you hear this. Before we dive into one of the most twisted cases of deception you'll ever witness, smash that subscribe button, hit the bell, and drop a comment telling me how far you'd go to uncover the truth. Because trust me, after the story, you'll question everything you think you know about the people closest to you. It was a Tuesday morning in April 2019 when Rachel Hendricks sat at her kitchen table in the quiet suburb of Ashford, Connecticut, scrolling through old photographs on her laptop. The coffee had gone cold in her cup. The spring light filtered through lace curtains, casting soft patterns across the hardwood floor. She had been doing this more often lately, losing herself in memories of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Her husband, David Hendricks, had been dead for 3 years. At least, that's what she had been told. David's death had been sudden, brutal in its finality. A car accident on a rain-slicked highway in upstate New York. The vehicle had careened off a bridge, plunging into the icy waters of the Hudson River. They never recovered the body. The police said the current was too strong, the conditions too dangerous. They found his wallet, his wedding ring, scraps of clothing caught on the wreckage. That was enough. The case was closed. Rachel had mourned. She had rebuilt her life, piece by painful piece. But on this particular Tuesday, something impossible happened. Rachel was using Google Street View, idly exploring a neighborhood in a small coastal town in Portugal called Nazaré. She had always wanted to travel there, to see the giant waves that drew surfers from around the world. It was a harmless daydream, a momentary escape from the loneliness that still crept into her quiet house. She was navigating down a narrow cobblestone street lined with whitewashed houses and terracotta roofs when she stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hand froze on the mouse. There, standing outside a small café with blue-painted shutters, was a man who looked exactly like her dead husband. The image was slightly blurred, as Street View images often are, but the details were unmistakable. The way he stood with his weight shifted to his right leg. The dark hair, the same length David always kept it. The build, the posture, even the watch on his left wrist that caught the Portuguese sunlight. Rachel's heart hammered against her ribs. She zoomed in, as far as the image would allow. Her vision blurred with tears she didn't realize were falling. It couldn't be. It was impossible. David was dead. She had attended his memorial service. She had spread his ashes, or what they told her were his ashes, in the lake where they used to fish together. She had signed the death certificate. She had collected the life insurance payout of $850,000. But the man in that photograph looked so much like David that Rachel felt the room spinning around her. She checked the date stamp on the image. June 2018. 1 year after David's supposed death. Her hands trembled as she took screenshot after screenshot, zooming in on every detail she could find. The café behind him had a name. O Pescador. The fisherman. She could see part of a street sign in the corner of the frame. Rachel's mind raced through every logical explanation. A doppelganger. A cruel coincidence. A glitch in the image. Some digital artifact that made a stranger resemble her husband. But deep in her gut, in that primal place where instinct lives, she knew. She knew with a certainty that made her nauseous. That was David. Her husband wasn't dead. He had faked his own death and fled to Portugal. The questions came in a flood.
Why? How?
Who helped him? Was he in danger?
Was she?
Had their entire marriage been a lie? Rachel stood from the table so quickly that her chair toppled backward, clattering against the floor. She paced the kitchen, her mind a whirlwind of shock and fury and disbelief. She thought about calling the police, but what would she say? That she saw her dead husband on Google Street View? They would think she had lost her mind with grief. She needed proof. Real proof. Something concrete. Rachel grabbed her phone and booked a flight to Lisbon for the following morning. She would drive to Nazaré. She would find that cafe. She would find David. And she would get answers, even if it destroyed everything she thought she knew about the man she had loved for 12 years. That night, Rachel barely slept. She lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of their life together, looking for cracks she had missed, red flags she had ignored. David had been a financial consultant, successful and well-traveled. He had access to accounts, to resources. The pieces were starting to fit together in terrible ways. The frequent business trips. The phone calls he took in other rooms. The way he had insisted on managing their finances alone, telling her not to worry her pretty head about investments and portfolios. By dawn, Rachel was on a plane. By evening, she was standing on that exact cobblestone street in Nazar, her heart pounding, staring at the café with blue shutters. The sign read, "Oh Pescator." The same café. She took a deep breath and walked inside. The interior was small, cozy, filled with locals drinking espresso and speaking in rapid Portuguese. She approached the counter, where an elderly woman with kind eyes and weathered hands smiled at her. Rachel pulled out her phone and showed the woman a photo of David. "Do you know this man?" she asked in English. The woman studied the photo for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly.
Sim. Yes. He comes here sometimes. Nice man.
Quiet. Rachel's world tilted. "Where can I find him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman hesitated, sensing something wrong. But something in Rachel's desperate eyes made her answer. "He lives in the house on the hill. The white one with the red door. Everyone knows it." Rachel thanked her and walked out into the Portuguese twilight, her pulse roaring in her ears. She climbed the narrow streets, following the woman's directions, until she stood before a beautiful whitewashed house overlooking the ocean. Red door. Flower boxes in the windows. It looked peaceful, serene, like a postcard from paradise. She raised her hand and knocked. The door opened, and there he stood, David Hendricks.
Alive. Tanned. Healthy.
His eyes went wide with shock, then something darker.
Fear.
Calculation. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The ocean wind filled the silence between them. Then Rachel said the only thing she could manage. "Hello, David. We need to talk." But when David stepped aside to let her in, Rachel saw something over his shoulder that made her blood run cold. A woman, young and beautiful, holding a baby in her arms. And the baby, no more than a year old, had David's eyes. Rachel stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes locked on the woman and child. The Portuguese sunset cast long shadows through the house, but nothing could obscure what she was seeing. David's second family. A life he had built while she mourned him back in Connecticut. The woman looked at Rachel with confusion, then at David with growing alarm. She said something in Portuguese, rapid and questioning. David responded in the same language, his voice tight with tension. He was fluent. When had he learned Portuguese? Rachel's shock crystallized into rage. "How long?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "How long have you been here, living this life, while I thought you were dead?" David glanced at the woman, then back to Rachel. His face had gone pale beneath his tan. "Rachel, please. Come inside. Let me explain. This isn't what you think." But Rachel knew exactly what it was. Betrayal in its purest form. She stepped into the house, her legs moving on autopilot. The interior was beautiful, furnished with local ceramics and ocean-colored tiles. Family photographs lined the walls. David with the woman on a beach. David holding the baby. A life captured in happy moments, while Rachel had been drowning in grief. The woman spoke again, more insistent this time. David answered her, and Rachel caught one word she recognized. Esposa.
Wife.
The woman's face strained of color. She clutched the baby tighter and backed away, disappearing into another room. Rachel heard a door close. Then it was just Rachel and the ghost she had married. "Start talking," Rachel said, her voice like steel. "And don't you dare lie to me."
Not now.
Not after everything. David ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Rachel remembered from 1,000 arguments, 1,000 difficult conversations. "I never meant for you to find out like this," he began. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Rachel laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the house. "You faked your own death, David. You took the insurance money, my grief, my life, and you ran. What did you mean to happen?" David moved to the window, staring out at the darkening ocean. "I was in trouble, Rachel. Serious trouble. the kind that gets people killed. He turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. I worked with some very dangerous people. I managed accounts for clients who weren't asking questions about where their money came from. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could keep it separate from our life. But I was wrong. Rachel's mind raced. Money laundering. That's what he was describing. So you decided to fake your death and leave me to deal with the consequences? She asked. David shook his head. They didn't know about you. I made sure of that. The accident, the staged drowning, it was the only way to disappear completely. These people, they have resources. They have reach. If they thought I had run, they would have hunted me down. But dead men don't run. Dead men aren't worth chasing. Who helped you? Rachel demanded. You didn't stage a car accident and forge a death certificate alone. David was quiet for a moment. My brother. The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. Mark. David's younger brother, who had been so supportive after the accident, who had helped her with the funeral arrangements, the paperwork, the endless bureaucratic nightmare of losing a spouse. Mark had known. Mark had lied to her face while she cried in his arms. The insurance money? Rachel asked, though she already knew the answer. Split 3 ways, David admitted. Me, Mark, and a man named Torres who specializes in making people disappear. It was enough to start over here, to build a new life. He gestured around the house. Clara, the woman you saw, she doesn't know any of this. She thinks I'm a consultant who relocated from America. She thinks my name is Daniel Ross. She thinks her daughter's father is an honest man. Rachel felt sick. And the baby? David's face softened. Sophia. She's 14 months old. He paused. I love them, Rachel. I know you don't want to hear that, but it's true. I found something here I never expected. Peace. A chance to be someone better than I was. Better? Rachel's voice rose. You left me to grieve alone. You let me think you were at the bottom of a river. You stole from me, lied to me, destroyed me. And you think you're better? David stepped toward her, hands raised. Rachel, please. I know I hurt you. I know what I did was unforgivable. But if you expose me now, if you tell anyone I'm alive, you won't just destroy this life. You'll put Clara and Sophia in danger. Those people I worked for, they're still out there. And if they find out I'm alive, they'll come for everyone I care about. Like you cared about me? Rachel shot back. But even through her rage, she felt the trap closing around her. David had orchestrated this perfectly. If she turned him in, she became complicit in whatever criminal enterprise he had been part of. The insurance fraud alone could send her to prison. And there was a child involved now, an innocent baby who didn't ask for any of this. Rachel pulled out her phone. I'm calling Detective Morrison, the one who closed your case. Let him sort this out. David's face hardened. You do that and we both go down. The insurance company will come after you for that money. They'll say you weren't on it from the start. Mark will testify that you knew. He'll save himself and throw you to the wolves. And Clara? She'll lose everything because of your revenge. Rachel's hand shook. She wanted to press dial so badly it hurt. But David was right about one thing. The insurance money had been deposited into their joint account. She had paid off the mortgage with it, invested the rest. Returning it now would bankrupt her and raise questions she couldn't answer without incriminating herself. Mark would lie to save himself. She knew that with certainty now. And that baby, innocent Sophia, would be caught in the explosion. What do you want from me? Rachel asked, hating how defeated she sounded. David took a breath. Walk away. Go home. Tell no one. Live your life, Rachel. Find someone who deserves you. Let me stay dead. Rachel stared at him. This man she had loved. This stranger wearing his face. You don't get to tell me what to do. Not anymore. She turned and walked toward the door, needing air, needing space to think. But as she reached for the handle, she heard something that made her freeze. Footsteps on the stone path outside. Multiple sets. Heavy. Purposeful. David heard them too. His face went white. Rachel, get away from the door, he whispered urgently. But it was too late. The red door burst open with a crash of splintering wood. 3 men poured into the house, and Rachel saw the guns before she saw their faces. The lead man was tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit that looked wrong in the casual coastal setting. He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "David Hendricks," he said in accented English. "Or should I say Daniel Ross? You've been very difficult to find." David stepped in front of Rachel instinctively. "Volkov." "How did you?" Volkov laughed. "Your wife made it easy. Do you think we don't monitor travel records? When Rachel Hendricks books a sudden flight to Portugal and comes straight to Nazar, we pay attention. We've been watching this house since she arrived." Rachel's blood turned to ice. She had led them right to him. She had been so focused on her own pain, her own need for answers, that she had never considered she might be followed. David had been right about one thing. These people had resources. And now they were here. "The money you stole from us," Volkov continued. "We want it back. With interest. You have 24 hours to transfer every cent, or your new family joins you at the bottom of the ocean. The real bottom this time." One of Volkov's men moved toward the room where Clara and the baby were hiding. Rachel heard Clara scream. Without thinking, Rachel lunged forward. "Leave them alone. They have nothing to do with this." Volkov turned his cold gaze to her. "And who are you to make demands? The grieving widow? Or were you in on it from the start?" David spoke quickly. "She knew nothing. Rachel is innocent. Clara and Sophia are innocent. This is between us, Volkov. Let them go, and I'll get you your money." Volkov seemed to consider this. 48 hours, he said finally. "Transfer $5 million to the account I'll provide, or everyone in this house dies. And David? If you run again, if you try to contact authorities, if you do anything except get me my money, I will make sure your deaths are slow and public. Starting with the baby." The men left as quickly as they had come, leaving the shattered door swinging in the ocean breeze. Clara emerged from the bedroom, tears streaming down her face, Sophia crying in her arms. She looked at David with betrayal and fear, understanding flooding her eyes even if she didn't speak English. She had heard the guns, seen the men. She knew danger when it walked through her door. Rachel stood in the center of the chaos, her mind reeling. She had come here for answers, for closure, for justice. Instead, she had stumbled into something far darker and more dangerous than she could have imagined. David looked at her, and she saw him clearly for the first time. Not the man she had married, not the ghost she had mourned, but a desperate criminal with blood on his hands and nowhere left to run. "We need to work together," David said quietly. "It's the only way any of us survive this." Rachel wanted to laugh, wanted to scream, wanted to walk out and let him face the consequences of his choices. But she looked at Clara holding that baby, at Sophia's innocent face, and she knew she was trapped. Not by David's lies anymore, but by her own conscience. She couldn't let a child die because of his crimes, even if every fiber of her being wanted to watch him burn. "Where are you going to get $5 million in 48 hours? Rachel asked. David met her eyes, and she saw something calculating there, something that made her stomach drop. "I know where Volkov keeps his money," he said slowly. "If we're smart, if we're brave, we might be able to steal it back." And just like that, Rachel Hendricks, grieving widow from Connecticut, found herself planning a heist with the dead husband who had destroyed her life. The plan was insane. Rachel knew at the moment David spread a hand-drawn map across the kitchen table, marking locations with a pencil that trembled slightly in his fingers. Clara had taken Sophia upstairs, her footsteps heavy with the weight of shattered illusions. The baby's cries had finally quieted, leaving only the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below and the ticking of a clock that seemed to count down their lives minute by minute. "Volkov keeps his primary cash reserves in a villa 15 kilometers from here," David explained, his voice low and urgent. "I helped him set up the security system 2 years ago, before everything went wrong. He has approximately 12 million euros in a safe room. He doesn't trust banks for obvious reasons. If we can get in, get the money, and get out before anyone notices, we can pay him back and have enough left to disappear properly. All of us." Rachel stared at him like he had lost his mind. You want to rob a Russian crime lord? The same man who just threatened to murder a baby. David's jaw tightened. It's the only option we have. I don't have $5 million sitting in an account. The insurance money is long gone. This is survival, Rachel. For all of us. She wanted to argue, but the math was brutally simple. They had no money, no time, and no options. Going to the police would take too long and guarantee retaliation. Running would only delay the inevitable. Volkov had found David once. He would find him again. Tell me about the security, Rachel said, hating herself for even considering this. David's eyes flickered with something like hope mixed with guilt. 4 cameras at the perimeter, motion sensors on the grounds, a 12-digit keypad at the main entrance, and biometric locks on the safe room itself. But I know his patterns. Volkov visits the villa every Thursday to collect cash for his operations. Tomorrow is Wednesday. The villa will be minimally staffed. Just 2 guards. Just 2 armed guards, Rachel corrected. And how exactly do you plan to bypass biometric locks? David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. Before I left, I copied Volkov's entire security database. Fingerprints, retinal scans, every access code. I kept it as insurance, in case I ever needed leverage. Torres, the man who helped me disappear, he knows people who can create fake biometric overlays. It will cost us 10,000 euros and 6 hours. Rachel's head spun. You've been planning this? You've been sitting on this information while Volkov's been looking for you. David shook his head. I never thought I'd have to use it. I thought I was safe here. I thought you'd never find me. I thought my old life was buried. He looked at her with something that might have been remorse. But you did find me. And now we're both in this nightmare together. The words hung between them, heavy with bitter irony. Rachel had searched for the truth, and the truth had nearly killed her. She thought about walking away, about booking a flight home, and letting David face his demons alone. But Volkov's men knew who she was now. They had seen her face. And if David failed to pay, they wouldn't just come for him and Clara. They would come for Rachel too. She was a loose end, a witness, a complication in their criminal enterprise. David had trapped her the moment she knocked on that red door. If we do this, Rachel said slowly, and somehow we survive, I never want to see you again. Not in this life or any other. David nodded. Agreed. They worked through the night. David made calls in hushed Portuguese to contacts Rachel didn't want to know about. By dawn, a wiry man named Torres arrived at the house carrying a silver briefcase and an expression of practiced neutrality. He barely looked at Rachel as he set up equipment on the dining table, scanning David's thumb and retina with devices that looked like they belonged in a spy movie. Torres worked with mechanical efficiency, creating synthetic overlays that would fool Volkov's biometric scanners. He spoke only once to David in Portuguese. David translated. He says we have one shot. The overlays degrade after a single use. If we fail, there's no second chance. Rachel watched the process, feeling increasingly surreal. 48 hours ago, she had been in Connecticut, drinking cold coffee and scrolling through Google Street View. Now she was watching a criminal forger create fake fingerprints so she could rob a Russian mobster. Her life had become unrecognizable. That evening, as purple dusk settled over Nazar, Rachel and David drove north in a rented car. Clara stayed behind with Sophia, her eyes hollow with fear and betrayal. David had tried to explain, to apologize, but Clara had turned away. Some betrayals were too deep for words. Rachel understood that better than anyone. The villa sat on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, surrounded by high walls and iron gates. It was brutally modern, all glass and steel, designed to intimidate. David parked the car a kilometer away in a grove of olive trees. They would approach on foot, using the darkness as cover. Rachel wore black clothing David had purchased that afternoon, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Once we're inside, we have approximately 7 minutes before the next security patrol cycle, David whispered as they crept through the shadows toward the perimeter wall. The safe room is in the basement. We get in, Fill the bags and get out. No hesitation. No mistakes. Rachel's hands were shaking. She had never broken a law more serious than speeding. Now she was committing armed robbery against one of the most dangerous men in Europe. The absurdity would have been funny if the stakes weren't life and death. David used the copied codes to disable the perimeter cameras. They climbed the wall using a rope Torres had provided, dropping into manicured gardens that smelled of jasmine and salt air. Rachel could see lights burning in the villa's windows. Shadows moved inside. The guards David had mentioned. Her mouth went dry. They moved quickly across the lawn, staying low. David led them to a side entrance, a service door hidden behind ornamental hedges. He pressed his thumb to the biometric scanner. Rachel held her breath. Nothing happened. The seconds stretched. Then a soft click, and the door slid open. Inside, the villa was cold and sterile. White marble floors, modern art on the walls, the kind of wealth that felt empty and soulless. They moved through corridors toward the basement stairs. Rachel's every sense was heightened. She heard voices from somewhere above them, speaking in Russian. Smelled cigarette smoke. Saw the glow of security monitors reflecting off a distant doorway. David opened the basement door, and they descended into darkness. At the bottom, another door. Another biometric lock. David used the fake retinal overlay, holding the synthetic lens to his eye while the scanner blinked red, then green. The door opened. The safe room was smaller than Rachel expected. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with cash in multiple currencies, bundled and labeled. Euros, dollars, pounds. There were also weapons, documents, and things Rachel didn't want to identify. David moved immediately to the euro shelves, pulling out 2 black duffel bags. They worked in frantic silence, stuffing cash into bags until their arms ached. 5 million euros was heavier than Rachel had imagined. The bags were nearly impossible to lift. That's when they heard the footsteps above them. Heavy boots on marble. Voices calling out in Russian. Someone had discovered the disabled cameras or noticed the breached door. The security patrol had come early. David's face went white. We need to move.
Now.
They hefted the bags and ran for the stairs, but the footsteps were getting closer. They would never make it out the way they came in. David grabbed Rachel's arm and pulled her in a different direction, through a narrow corridor she hadn't noticed before. A service tunnel, dusty and dark. They ran blind, the bags bouncing against their legs, lungs burning. Behind them, Rachel heard shouts and the sound of boots thundering down the basement stairs. A gunshot cracked through the air, deafening in the enclosed space. Rachel screamed, but kept running. The tunnel ended at a metal ladder leading upward. David climbed first, pushing against a heavy grate. It gave way, opening into the night air. They were outside the villa walls, on the cliffside. The ocean roared below them, waves smashing against rocks 50 meters down. They pulled the bags up and ran for the car, expecting bullets to follow them. But none came. Either the guards hadn't found the tunnel exit, or they were regrouping. It didn't matter. They had the money. David drove like a demon back to Nazar, taking back roads and dirt paths. Rachel clutched the bags, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and terror. They had done it. They had actually stolen 5 million euros from a Russian crime lord. The insanity of it hit her in waves. When they reached the house, Clara was waiting, her face drawn with worry. David spoke to her rapidly in Portuguese, gesturing to the bags. Clara's expression flickered between relief and disgust. Sophia was crying upstairs, and Clara turned away to tend to her daughter, without another word to David. David called Volkov's number. The Russian answered on the first ring. I have your money, David said, his voice steady despite the sweat on his forehead. All of it. Tell me where to transfer it. Volkov was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, there was cold amusement in his voice. You robbed me, David. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Rachel's blood turned to ice. Volkov laughed. But I admire your courage. Or your stupidity. Transfer the money to the account I'll send you. All of it. Consider the extra 7 million a penalty for your audacity. And David, if you ever cross me again, I will erase everyone you've ever loved from this earth. The line went dead. David stared at the phone, his face ashen. They had stolen 12 million, but Volkov wanted it all. Every cent. They would be left with nothing. No escape money. No safety net. Nothing. Rachel wanted to scream. They had risked everything, committed crimes that could imprison them for decades, and they were right back where they started. Broke, hunted, and desperate. But they were alive. Rachel transferred the money that night, every euro, while David watched in silence. When it was done, she stood and looked at the man who had destroyed her life twice over.
"I'm leaving," she said.
"I'm going back to Connecticut. I'm going to tell the insurance company I made a mistake. I'm going to return what's left of the money and face whatever consequences come.
Because I can't live like this.
I won't become what you are." David didn't try to stop her. He just nodded, broken and defeated. "I'm sorry, Rachel. For everything." She walked out of the house with the red door and didn't look back. At the airport the next morning, she called Detective Morrison. She told him everything. About David, about Volkov, about the money and the lies. Morrison was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Rachel, I believe you. But this is bigger than local police. I'm connecting you with the FBI. They've been building a case against Volkov for years. Your testimony could bring him down." 3 months later, Rachel sat in a federal courtroom in New York, testifying against the Russian crime network. She told them about the villa, the safe room, the €5 million demand. The FBI had raided Volkov's operations across 3 continents. They found evidence of money laundering, arms trafficking, and murder. Volkov was arrested in Monaco, extradited, and sentenced to 40 years in prison. David wasn't so lucky. Portuguese police found his body 2 weeks after Rachel left Nazar. He had been shot twice in the head, his body dumped in the ocean where he had once pretended to die. Clara and Sophia had disappeared, relocated by witness protection to somewhere David's enemies would never find them. Rachel had saved their lives by exposing everything. But she couldn't save David. Some debts could only be paid in blood. Rachel returned to her quiet house in Ashford, Connecticut. She sold it within a month and moved across the country, to a small town in Oregon where nobody knew her story. She started over, one painful day at a time, learning to trust again, learning to forgive herself for the choices she had made in those desperate 48 hours. She never married again, never searched for anyone on Google Street View. And when people asked about the faint scar on her hand from climbing Volkov's wall, she smiled and changed the subject. Some stories were too dark to tell over coffee. Some truths were too heavy to share with strangers. But late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, Rachel sometimes thought about that moment in the safe room, stuffing cash into bags while her dead husband stood beside her. She thought about the red door and the baby with David's eyes. She thought about the thin line between victim and criminal, between justice and revenge. And she wondered if David had ever truly loved her, or if she had been just another mark in a long con that ended with his death. She would never know. And perhaps that was the cruelest part of all. The mystery that even Google Street View couldn't solve. The question that haunted her more than any ghost. Had he ever been the man she thought she married, or had that man never existed at all? Rachel lived with that question every single day. And every single day, she chose to keep living anyway. Because survival, she had learned, was its own kind of victory. Even when the cost was everything you thought you knew about love.